right, so you've been doing this CLOing thing quite a long time. Going back to Singular, what was Cooper's Library, now PwC. You've been also at Yum Brands, and then joining McDonald's. You were also 2013 CLO of the Year, which I like to point to as what got you your next gig.
There you go.
Because you joined McDonald's in 2014.
Happens to all the CLOs of the year, it seems like.
Right.
There's a pattern.
There's a pattern. There's also there's a little bit of a cover curse too. I don't know if you know about that. You know,
Yes,
you've heard of the
there's one
Sports
too.
Illustrated cover curse.
Yep.
Yeah. There's a little bit of that. for
There's
CLOs.
definitely that. Yeah.
So let's kind of go back to what got you into L&D. So what made this the career that you want to, the path you want to take? There's always a story there. Sometimes it's dramatic, sometimes it's not. What's your story?
I'll try and make it dramatic, flavored. So I got out of college and I worked for Dun & Bradstreet, and I was Dun & Bradstreet, if you don't know, is a company that gathers business information on other companies, sort of like the credit rating agencies for companies at the time anyway. And you used to have to go literally door to door to gather information on small businesses and to do that. And so I did that for probably about 4 or 5 years, and I had different operational roles. And one day somebody said, hey, you really know this stuff really well, why don't you be a trainer, right? Which is the classic model. And next thing I know, I was stepping in, doing sales training classes for about 2,000 people a year, 45 weeks of the year. So that was my first foray. I didn't expect to kind of pursue that path because I was always actually trying to get back into operational roles from there. But in 1993, with the advent of the personal computer, to scare all of you, the president of our business came down, and we used to have this crazy business model. We flew new hires in to a conference center in Georgia, and they went through the sales training, and like 60% of them would turn over every year. And it would be like 2,000 people, so it wasn't cheap kind of stuff. And he came down and he said, the bad news is we're going to shut down this business model because it's completely irrational for us as a business. As we introduce technology, we're going to need less offices, we're going to contract basically our workforce, so we don't need to do this anymore. The good news is you have 6 months to give me a proposal on what we should be doing to train our new people, because we're still going to be hiring people into these roles. So that was sort of an interesting moment of truth. And he said, you can stay working for us if we buy the idea, or you can not if we don't. So the ultimate business case moment. So we went through this process, and in the process of sort of figuring out what to do, there was 4 of us, I guess, at the time. We dove into sort of principles around instructional design and adult learning, and really stepped back and said, all right, we have some time, so let's do a bit of a deep dive into the theory and the trends and the ideas around where people are and where we need to go. And for me, that turned on a light bulb in terms of understanding human behavior and human performance, and really shifting the lens of how I thought about what I do in a completely different way. And that moment, I figured out what I wanted to be when I grow up, much to my parents' joy, because I was like almost 30 at that point. Right?
And they needed you out of the basement.
Yeah. And they were tired of paying my car insurance and my rent. So that was kind of the moment. So I went back and got my master's, and the rest is kind of history from there.
So, I mean, you talked about kind of your growth as sort of a training manager. You're training people.
Yeah.
But then eventually you had to move into more of a leadership role. Can you talk about that transition and how you kind of navigated becoming, being a training expert to being more of a leader across the organization? Yeah.
I like to say most of it was accidental. I mean, I must have been doing something right, so I won't discount that, but I don't like to brag on myself, period, anyway. But when I worked at Bell South, there was in the mobility business, Bell South Mobility, which became Singular, there was a huge amount of change going on in the business in terms of they were getting into retail, they were getting into all different kinds of spaces, new technology, obviously in the 90s through probably mid-2000s. The whole wireless business was changing almost every week, new phones, new plans, I could download ringtones. That's so cool, right? We all laugh now. What was going on in the business as an expert, I was being asked to sort of consult beyond the space I was responsible for, which was management development. So I had a good relationship with the SVP of retail sales, and she came to me and she said, you know, here's what we're looking at for sales training. Can you just give me an eyeball and give me your opinion on this? And I said, you know, here's 3 things I do differently, and you know, here's a sort of sideways way of looking at this, and something you might want to consider. And literally 2 weeks later, I was running sales training. So it was kind of like, okay, crap, how'd that happen? Then the Singular Wireless deal came, where Bell South and SBC at the time were creating this joint venture, which became Singular. And there was a transition team, and it was rebuild the learning and development organization. Let's figure out how it should be structured and worked. And they said, we want you to lead the facilitation of that. So I facilitated that process between the 2 companies, which was very interesting. And then I got picked to be the leader of it. And honestly, that's how I became the CLO. So what shifted for me was really then thinking about what are the critical skills you need on the team against what the organization's trying to achieve. You know, what's our buy versus build model? You know, what do we insource versus what we outsource? All the stuff we still deal with today on that space. So that's what shifted the most.
Was there a particular chief learning officer, or just a leader in general, who you kind of pointed to when you started stepping into those roles as somebody you wanted to emulate, or you thought was a great person to sort of follow in the path of?
Yeah, I don't think there was a specific individual. There were different people that I ran across, say, through the 90s and into 2000s. Like Elliot Mazie was a bit of and still is a bit of a mentor to me. Kimo Kippen, believe it or not, I've known since 1993 in our master's program together. And he and I have stayed tight across the years too. So he was doing work at Marriott at the time, and I was stepping into a much larger role. He was in a much larger role. So folks like that, it was really different individuals that I learned from or would look to help me out on that front.
Yeah. So you've been doing this for almost 3 decades, over 3 decades?
Yes.
I'm sure you like me pointing that out.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. It was better last week when I talked to the 30 under 30 people, and I was like, oh crap, none of you were born when I was when I got in this job.
Laserdisc?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So, I mean, what does keep you excited about the job, since, I mean, you've been doing it for a while?
You know, I have this sick sense of liking to be really challenged, which is why I took the job at McDonald's. I think that the CLO role is particularly challenging and continues to be particularly challenging because you're trying to stand a structure on shifting sand, it feels like. And so for me, it's I like trying to, you know, play the game of trying to keep things optimal while the world is changing all around you in terms of what the business needs, or what the premise was, or what the assumptions that we had today about adult learning, you know, with neuroscience now, are changing all of that, those kind of things. I just find that incredibly interesting.
So, I mean, what's sort of the guiding principle as you try to navigate that sort of changing environment? What do you see as the key to your being successful in that sort of environment? I
try to stay grounded in the fact that human behavior is human behavior. So that's the good news. Like, human behavior is not changing, right? People always gravitate to things that make life easier, right? So that's why we all like iPhones, and that's why we all like apps, and that's why we all, whatever, we'll like autonomous driving cars, because we can just get in and not think about it, right? So thinking about that in a learning context, staying grounded in the things that are the same, right? It's about performance. It's always been about human performance. Learning will almost always be. I can't see a path where it won't still be about human performance. So staying grounded kind of in those principles for me helps sort of keep things straight.
Yeah.